Okay. I am Roshan Hendrickson. I teach international politics at the College of Staten Island. And my work happens to be in US relations with African countries. So that's a good complement to the papers that we have today. And our discussant is Scott Monge. Did I pronounce that right, Scott?
Monge.
Monge, sorry. Okay, Scott Monge. And we have two papers today. We'll start with David Gachigos and then have Osman Antwi Botengs. And then we'll discuss them. And I think that because there are just two, how about 20 minutes each? Does that sound good? All right, obviously, if you need a bit more time, that's fine, but we can follow up with, questions. All right, so let's start with David Gachigo from St. John's University. His paper is Obama's Soft Power and the Development of Future African Leaders. Oh, yes,
Apologies.
PowerPoint. Okay, so I'm going to try to figure out how we do this. And just start the timer. I'll just let you know when it's 15 minutes, but clearly we have plenty of time. So, okay. So I'm going to open this and try to share the screen. Now, I guess you'll need to signal to me when to click to the next.
Okay.
Sorry, now I have to let Zoom share my screen. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that would be necessary. And
Bottom in the middle.
no, I've already done that, but now it's asking my computer if I'm allowed to share the screen. And I'm not able to access that. Let's see. Just a second. Okay, I have to come back in the meeting for this to work. So I'll be right. Oh, no. End meeting for all. No.
Can I try see if I can share from my side?
Yes.
Yeah, that should be better. Yep.
Yeah.
That's better if you can do it. It's not letting me do it without ending the meeting.
Let me see if I'm able to.
Oh, wonderful.
Wait a second.
If I can find what I need.
Okay. I can send it to you.
Okay, that would be great. I think it's saved on my.
It would be in your email sent.
Oh yeah, I see some. Oh, there we go. All right.
Thank you, David. That works
You're
much
welcome.
better. Thank you.
I'm learning.
No, I clearly need to learn.
So you need to shift it up a little bit. Yeah, there we go.
It looks
Okay.
great. Yeah,
Oh, can you see it? Okay.
Actually, you still need to shift it up. You don't have the top of the title.
Let me see.
just the cursor on the right, I think.
Oh, I guess not. I wonder if it's the formatting, maybe. Nope.
I can see a little white cursor on the far right,
A little what?
a little, possibly a white knob you can use to shift it.
I don't see it on mine, unfortunately. My apologies. I can minimize this.
It looks like this will work though.
Do we want to go with that?
You just tell us what the top line says.
Yeah, so the top line says Obama software and the development of future African leaders. And then my apologies, I think the font, because of the format, that's why it's like that. So again, my name is David Gachigo. I work at St. John's University in the Division of Student Affairs as the Associate Dean of Student Affairs. But I'm also a part-time doctoral student, and my area is world history in African affairs, and currently in the dissertation phase. So again, with a focus on what I call a project Airlift Africa, and looking at the African students that were brought here mostly from East and Central Africa in the late 1950s, and which I'll talk about that in the paper. And so that is sort of, I'm looking at the impact and the US policy on Africa relations at the time during colonial times in relation to education issues. So again, I'll touch on that as well as part of my paper. So again, in relation to that interest on African education, I was focusing on on young people, and so looking at the Obama administration, its policy on Africa, and really looking at the interest on how it was sort of looking Africa from their perspective. So again, from a different change. So again, we go back to 2008, as you recall that night with the election of the president, African-American president, and what it meant, the global impact, not only at home, but also I think at a global scale. So on the left side there, if you can see images from Chicago. And on the right side, my right, this is a celebration that was happening in Kenya. And this is important because, again, it brings in this perspective of the global impact of what it meant for an Obama presidency. If you recall, again, I mentioned this issue of education because in late 1959, we had about 800 East and Central African students that were elected to America between those 3 years, so between 1959 and 61. And the students were elected to come to America and a few in Canada to go to high school and American colleges. And the intention was for this group of students, when they finish education in America, to go back to the African countries when they became independent, so that they could assume the role of the new leadership. So as the colonial administration exited these countries, the idea was for these Africans to fill these roles in terms of moving in as the new leaders and administrators. So amongst this group of the airlift of 1959, there was about 81 students that came from that airlift. There was a young man who would come in later, through the group, and went to University of Hawaii, and that was Barack Obama Sr. So he was part of this group, goes to University of Hawaii, and part of his funding for school was paid for through the African American Student Foundation, in partnership with Jackie Robinson, who was part of the board member for this organization. And so from there, from Hawaii all the way to Harvard, and of course we know the history, and again Barack Obama being born again to Obama Sr. And of course, my argument is this experience of Barack Obama being born of Kenyan father sort of created this global impact, this global connection, and it's in what in my paper I argue what is regarded to the son of soil. So it's this idea of even though he's born in America, he's part of us. Even though he's born in America, we have a connection now to this young man who's now assuming the office in the White House. And the interpretation from that was that this would change the dynamic of how we, meaning Africans, were viewing America, because now again we had our own in the White House. And even looking from the celebration, for example, on the Kenyan side, the argument was the victory on the American side was not only for America, it was also for us Africans and for us really as Kenyans, because he was one of us. And there was this argument that out of this experience, there will be quote unquote access to American largesse, so that again with American power, the idea of for us being the African continent would be some benefit coming out of this relationship. And so again, this sort of sets the pace. This sort of sets the rethinking of the U.S.-American relations, because again, it was seen as one that was sort of not cozy, I think, prior to to the election of Obama. Again, it was seen as one of quote unquote the handout relationship, where sort of the U.S. was dominant in terms of the expectation of how it dealt with Africa. So again, it was interesting because again, if you look at how the world viewed, how Africa viewed U.S. at the time. If you recall, prior to Obama administration, there was really not that sort of lukewarm relationship, and especially I think with the George Bush experience and of course the aftermath of Iraq War, there was some resonance, right, in terms of Africa seeing United States in a very different picture. And so again, there was quite a bit a gap in terms of that particular perspective. And so I talk about the Obama connection. To the right, the picture you see there is the picture of the first group of students that came in through the airlift as they were being brought in America. And again, I did mention that Obama Sr. was part of this group. And again, for me, I argue that from this experience, shaped sort of the Obama's worldview, because again, he's not only born to a Kenyan father, but also at some point in his early his formative period, spent some time in Kenya. So he's gone back and forth even before he starts sort of his leadership journey in the United States. The other argument is this idea of again resetting the relationship, because when you look at, for example, at the presidential policy 16, which sort of touches on the sub-Saharan Africa signed in 2012, it sort of gives you an idea of what his administration is thinking about Africa. And so I think in looking at those ideals, you start seeing the resetting of this sort of relationship. And he talks about this when he actually travels to Ghana in 2009, where he mentioned that Africa's problems have to be solved by Africans. But as we Americans, we're coming in as partners. So he tries to sort of paint this picture of mutual respect between Africa and the United States, and that the American side is here to help in uplifting as Africa tries to move on its own journey, but also at the same time uses this this platform to leverage the goodwill that is happening in Africa. And one of the arguments is from this perspective, Obama is able now to call on, for example, the African countries and African leaders that are sort of going against the ideals of good governance, because he's considering himself being one of them. And so you couldn't sit and argue as an African and say, wait a minute, this outside is telling us this is the direction we need to take. So he considered himself as being part of the people at home. And so this gave him leverage really to start looking at Africa differently and use his sort of prism or worldview in re-engaging with Africa. And so from the what I mentioned, the presidential policy directive, you start sort of seeing the picture in terms of what does Obama mean in terms of re-engaging in Africa. So it's the idea of still trying to continue pushing the path for the idea of democracy. So good democratic ideals for a brighter Africa. The idea of good governance, of course, one of the concerns or issues that have always been on the table and sometimes been considered a taboo in terms of discussion has been this idea of corruption, right? That the continent has so much, but yet is being sort of bogged down by corruption, in many of the African countries, sub-Saharan African countries. And so that the argument from the Obama administration was, if you tackle democracy, if you tackle instill good governance, then other things will follow. And of course, above all, if you follow the respect of human rights, then there's sort of dignity in how the citizens deal with those in power. And so, this will be a win-win for the continent. So it can be able to sort of move to the next level with the next generation of leaders in a sort of a brighter and transformative way. And the fourth area that Obama sort of focuses on is this idea of what they call the trade and not aid argument. And so Obama is saying, as we interact, as we re-engage with Africa, we're not here to give aid. What we want to do is to help you, stand up. So this is the sort of the argument that we're looking for investment, both from the African perspective, but also trying to bring in America back again in terms of dealing in Africa, in dealing with the African countries. Because again, young continent with so much potential, which means it will be a win-win economically, both for the African countries and also for the United States. And again, this sort of touches on one of the areas that I'll talk about later, which is China, because again, as Obama sort of assumes the presidency, the Chinese have, have been really involved on the African continent, both from all sections of the continent, and the impact, it's been felt. It's been great, and on the ground, you can see the change. And so, how does Obama counter that Chinese narrative? And so that is what, again, one of the areas that, he uses this idea of trade, not aid, and of course, the good governance to be able to tackle some of those challenges. So one of the areas that the Obama administration looked at was to leverage the African population, the young African youth under the age of 35. They're about 60% of the continent. So that's a huge population that can make a difference in terms of where the continent goes in the future. And so his interaction was one that was looking at ways of how to influence these future leaders, to engage with these future leaders. And in one of the occasions, for example, was in 2010 when he creates what he called the Young African Leader. For example, this was a meeting, this future meeting in 2010 at the White House, where he invited over leaders from over 50, African countries. And the idea was to, talk about the importance of leadership, to talk about the importance of their involvement in matters of Africa. And he sort of insisted on, the idea that we are moving away now from the older generation, the independent generation, and that these young people were now going to assume the future of Africa. And so it was important to pay attention and to support them in making those differences. So some of the programs that are sort of created through the Obama presidency, again, I talk about the Young African Leadership Initiative. where the administration worked with the consulates and embassies in Africa. And the idea was to recruit young people in youth leadership development. And of course, this came with the funding from the State Department to make sure that the programs were able to be successful. And again, looking at all the sections, Sub-Saharan Africa, looking at different areas, this is one of the areas that I was able to pull in a lot of young leaders, and again with the support of the State Department. In 2014, the administration launched what we call the Mandela Washington Fellows Program, and so it was a step up from the YALI program. And what they did was they looked at the young African leaders, 25 to 35, and the idea was to look amongst them what they call fellows, who had ideas in public service, ideas in civic engagement, ideas in business entrepreneurship. And so from 2014, over 600 of these young African leaders attend over 30 American colleges and universities. For example, here in New York, Wagner was one of them, recipients of students in this program. And the idea was to bring them to America for 3 months, take summer courses, connect with American leaders in the private and public sector, and also launch some of their programs. Towards the end of the program, they would travel to Washington, D.C., and then head back to Africa. So, and going back, they'll be funded again by the State Department in various aspects. So this has been also one of those programs that is hitting the ground running since its launch in 2014. They've added the YALI regional leadership centers located in 4 corners of the continent: Nairobi, Accra, Dakar, Senegal, and one in Pretoria, South Africa. And the idea is to connect all the leaders from all these different countries in these regions, ideas through social media, through civic engagement and empowerment. And the hope that from this connection, that America will create partners of this, out of these young people. And again, they will influence the future, because again, if you are sitting in the State Department and you have connections from all these leaders, young leaders, upcoming leaders in the African continent, they'll have a say in the future and they'll determine where the continent goes. And then to make this work, the launch of the Global Entrepreneurial Summit helped, because again, it brought on board the financial sector, to be able to support these programs. MasterCard was one of the programs, Microsoft as well, that partnered with the Obama administration. And the idea was to put in money to help in supporting this initiative monetarily. So whatever program initiative that some of these leaders had, the idea was then there will be money that would be backing the programs in mind. And so over the years, the program has continued to grow. The YALI has closer to 70,000 what they call YALI network leaders. So again, it's seen fluctuations. For example, during the Trump presidency, the numbers went down. Again, they've started going up again in terms of the commitment for the program. But having said that, we talked about the economic impact, and we talked about the issue of China in the African continent. And so as Obama was looking at the continent, one of the areas was, how do you deal with the Chinese challenge? How do you deal with the challenge from China with all this investment and all this money that is being put on the ground on the continent? And again, I think, and remember, on the other side, you have China that is coming in and has what's called the non-interference policy. So China will look the other way if there's issues of human rights, democracy, or corruption violations, because for them, they want to do business in Africa. They want to put the investment and grow out of those investments on the African continent. And again, I think looking at, for example, by 2014, the Obama administration had committed through the private sector about that $3 billion to be used in various projects in the African continent. Well, that particular period, the Chinese were committed about 86 billion. So you can see the big money from China that is coming in the African continent and trying to really change the outlook and the relationship. And the challenge was that whereas the Obama administration, had, worked closer with the government, had worked closer with the young people, the resonance was kind of the reaction or reception on the continent was different. And one of the arguments was you could, from the African perspective, looking at countries, for example, a good example in Kenya, where I grew up myself, you could see infrastructure, big infrastructure, roads, railways, airports, things that are being done by Chinese investments. And so over time, we've been friends with the Americans and over the years. But again, now you had something you could connect with. I can see a road. We didn't have one, now there's a road now. And so trying to counter that, that became as a challenge. How do you say the road that is over there is not good because, again, it's built with corruption money? That became a challenge in terms of dealing with that. And so the narrative was to go around it and use the networks of the young people to raise a debate in terms of those investments and what it meant in the future of Africans. What else was happening? The Chinese, on the other hand, also were not only investing in the infrastructure, they also brought in what they call the Confucian Institute. So the idea was to bring in this idea of the Confucianism and that China was good for Africa. And they also partnered with, for example, in East Africa, with the universities. The first institute was launched in Kenya, in Nairobi University in 2005. And so the idea was to also bring Africans to go to attend universities in China through scholarships and then come back at home. And so again, this also was creating networks on the Chinese side, because you went to school in China, you came back, you would look at investments that are connected to the Chinese, which sort of pushes that particular agenda. And so I talked about the strategy from the Obama administration was, again, using youth and civil societies to counter the Chinese narrative, to raise the stake in terms of the debates on what we call the debt trap and the impact of long-term impact of the Chinese investment of the African continent. Pushing for the government for the transparency and open governance to talk about the impact. How much money are we borrowing? How much money are we spending? And I know, for example, in Kenya, this has become a hot debate, even in Parliament, where I've been trying to push the government to change stance in terms of how it's borrowing. But again, I think the challenge becomes in the ruling elite see all this money that is coming without attachment, at least from their perspective, coming from Beijing. And it's good for them because it helps create projects that are tangible, that the people can see, despite the fact that there's others on the back end strings attached. So I think that is where the challenge has been in terms of the during the Obama presidency, and as they tried to sort of re-engage with Africa. The goodwill was there, but the challenge was also, competing with the, quote unquote, the Chinese money. And so for me, what I argue on this paper is, despite the fact that the Obama presidency did make, great strides in re-engaging with Africa, helping in bringing up the youth programs in those that brought the U.S.-Africa relations at a different level. They were still facing challenges from the East, again through the challenges of the Sino-African relations, and this has not changed. The trend has continued to the same as at least from East African perspective. Investments are continuing, and this has not changed. Despite some of these countries being very, very close to America. So again, I believe this is a challenge that will continue there for the time being, and until the issue or the actual repercussion of the debt trap is realized, this is going to be there for long haul. So again, the challenge is from where we sit, the African countries are interacting on both sides, both east with Beijing and west with Washington, trying to be in good relation, because I think it's for them, they are looking at what moves the continent forward, albeit at what level. So again, challenges are there, but also there is hope for the future, of the continent. And again, that is pegged the hope among the young people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. So next we will have Osman Antwi Boteng. And Osman, I'm just going to write in the chat when it's 15 minutes and then 20, but obviously, taking a little bit more than that is fine.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
And are you able to put up the PowerPoint yourself?
Yes, please. Yes. Before I can do that, I think the first presenter needs to exit.
Yes, I think.
Yes.
Take down the PowerPoint. Yeah.
Right.
So would it just be not sharing your screen, David?
Right.
Or?
Yes, I think, yeah, he has to. Yeah, all right.
Wonderful.
Okay, let me attempt to upload my stuff. Just a second. All right. Okay. Can everybody see my my slides?
No.
It hasn't opened yet, so maybe try clicking again. I'm not sure you've clicked interview. Try clicking it again. There we go.
There it is.
Perfect.
You can see it, right?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Greetings from Arabia. Far away from Arabia. We say here, Assalamu alaikum. It's Ramadan out here, so excuse me if my energy levels are very low, because I just broke almost a 14-hour fast. So barely made it. So please forgive me if I might not sound too energetic. So I'll try my best, however. So please bear with me. My name is Osman Antwi Boteng. I'm an associate professor of political science and international relations, originally from Ghana, and I'm based in Abu Dhabi, working at United Arab Emirates University. And my topic today is UAE humanitarianism in the era of COVID-19. Right. Basically, this research seeks to contribute towards the literature on soft power. And I think the previous presenter gave a very good angle, and there seemed to be some kind of connection between this paper and the previous one, albeit in the humanitarian side. Now, in this era of turbulence in global affairs, countries are always looking for ways and means and opportunities to basically be relevant in international affairs. Most of international relations, predictably, is dominated by the great powers, and therefore emerging countries and small countries like the UAE are always jostling and looking for angles to be relevant. And one of the areas where they can be of relevance or area that offers promise for them to exert any form of global influence is in the area of soft power, okay? And particularly in the UAE, it has embraced soft power, all right, as a form of foreign policy, all right? Relying on its attractions, and it offers several attractions. Relying on its attractions, in order to be influential. And one of the areas in which it has focused on when it comes to soft power is in the area of humanitarian assistance. And this is where they have expended considerable amount of investment to generate soft power in order to attract international tourists, in order to woo foreign investment, and also to basically create a reputation for the UAE as a tolerant and progressive, moderate Islamic country that is open for business and also for bilateral and multilateral relations with the rest of the world. Now, in terms of the conceptual framework of this research, as I pointed out, it is rooted in the soft power literature. And basically, I made the case that COVID diplomacy basically is the new form of soft power, where basically I make the point that preparation, in this case, years of investment or years of soft power cultivation by countries like the UAE has positioned such countries to basically take advantage or basically to open a new chapter in soft power in the form of COVID diplomacy. It basically means, all right, philanthropy, all right, or in the form of bilateral and multilateral humanitarian assistance in the midst of pandemic. So this COVID crisis or pandemic has opened an avenue for countries like the UAE with pre-existing soft power tools and a series of attractions to be able to exert some form of soft power influence around the world. So therefore, the research question that I see to answer is that what factors has enabled countries like the UAE to be able to exercise COVID diplomacy? And then the second question that I seek to answer in my research is, how does the UAE exercise this COVID diplomacy? Now, in terms of the first question, I basically made the case that the COVID pandemic basically has afforded countries like the UAE that have cultivated soft power tools to actually, capitalize on this. And as the saying goes, or as the cliche goes, okay, never let a crisis go waste. And in this case, countries like the UAE have benefited in exerting global influence and cultivating soft power in the midst of this pandemic, mostly because of how they've been effective at managing their own domestic COVID cases. The UAE is ranked as one of the countries that effectively tackled the COVID pandemic, effectively right from the beginning, to the extent that up to today, it is the most highly vaccinated country in the world, all right, which is remarkable, all right? As I speak to you right now, over 100% of eligible residents and citizens have taken at least one vaccine, and over 80% have taken over 3 vaccines, all right, shots to combat the pandemic, making an overall vaccination rate over 90%, the highest in the world. Now, this achievement has enhanced the reputation of the UAE when it comes to its policy of trying to be a major player in the global pandemic, in the fight against the global pandemic. Because obviously, if you want to exert influence in terms of COVID diplomacy, you should be able to have some level of credibility. And credibility is very important when it comes to soft power. You cannot preach things that you don't practice. All right. So in the case of the UAE, their effective pandemic response has given them the international cachet and reputation to be an active player in the global pandemic, and of course, in this case, in COVID diplomacy. Also, The UAE has been effective in this COVID diplomacy because of a commitment to soft power via philanthropy. So long before the pandemic struck, the UAE has, been amongst the global leaders when it comes to international philanthropy and also international aid. It has a long track record of global philanthropy, donating to several causes and norms around the world that are seen as legitimate. Between the from 2010 to 2021, the UAE has, contributed an amount of $56 billion in foreign aid, which is one of the highest, if not the highest, in terms of per capita. All right, this is huge. So clearly, with such a track record, the UAE has built the capacity, has built the goodwill, has built the reputation as a major donor. So therefore, when COVID struck, they were basically just, a policy as usual. It was nothing new for it to seize the moment and play an active role around the world, thereby burnishing its foreign policy credential and also enhancing its soft power credentials around the world. So in terms of a commitment to soft power, in 2007, the UAE government institutionalized the norm of philanthropy by adopting the US soft power strategy. And due to this institutionalization of soft power, it has positioned the UAE to be an active player when it comes to this new phenomenon called COVID diplomacy. The next factor that is aiding COVID diplomacy is a strong and resilient economy. An often overlooked aspect of soft power influence is the fact that it is a very expensive exercise, whether in the form of giving scholarships, as the previous presenter pointed out, offering these scholarships to a generation of future leaders and all this kind of stuff is quite a financial expense. The United States has done this quite effectively, and throughout US history, and as regimes and parties change power and stuff like that, you see, all right, either a reduction or an increment in the funding for these kind of projects. And the same applies to countries like the UAE. So in order to be able to exercise soft power, particularly when it comes to international philanthropy and foreign aid, you need to have a very solid economy. You need to have a resilient economy. And in an era of pandemic, which has adversely affected global economy all over the world, right? In terms of crisis, one of the easiest aspects of every country's budget that the politicians target is foreign aid. So in order to be effective and seize the moment in COVID diplomacy, you need to have a very strong, resilient economy that basically is shielded or survives, the adverse effect of a pandemic. And clearly, the UAE seems to have been impervious to the adverse effects of the global pandemic. Its economy is very resilient. Its ability to absorb economic recessions and global crises like pandemics has proven to be quite remarkable, to the point that throughout the pandemic, its economy was ranked as the 9th most competitive in the world. So in the midst of austerity measures globally, the UAE did not miss a heartbeat. It continued to sustain its levels of international philanthropy, and this was largely because of the resilience of its economy. The next factor that is aiding or has aided UAE's COVID diplomacy is its international engagement and reputation. Reputation matters a lot. And in this era where, there's a lot of scrutiny in terms of where, agencies and where, countries are receiving aid, many countries and many international institutions and civil society organizations are very wary of receiving funds and money from countries, particularly countries in the Middle East are known, do not have a good reputation, maybe because of, their human rights record or their foreign policies and all that kind of stuff. And although UAE is not, immune to some of these criticisms, by and large, all right, it has a very healthy reputation in the international community, so much so that countries are willing to engage it. Multilateral institutions are willing to engage it. Private organizations, global aid agencies are willing to engage and accept its funding for their missions around the world. Also, the UAE has a very large, international footprint for a country of this size. Multiple embassies, over 100 of these, 21 consulates. It hosts over 125 embassies, 76 consulate, and 6 diplomatic representatives in the capital of Abu Dhabi. Now, all of these global footprint enables the UAE to have the launching pad to be able to exercise the necessary influence when it comes to COVID diplomacy. The next one is excellent infrastructure. In terms of attraction, clearly the UAE is ranked by several global economic indexes as having one of the best infrastructure in the world in terms of quality of roads, airports, ports, mobile phone access, in terms of internet connections, hospitals, medical facilities. All of these, has made the UAE a major player in the global supply chain, particularly in the transportation and manufacturing of COVID vaccinations. This is buoyed by the fact that it has one of the most effective and popular airline companies in the form of Emirates Airlines. And the Emirates Airlines has been a major boost in terms of transporting vaccinations around the world. UAE's leadership in terms of infrastructure, aviation infrastructure, has positioned the country as an aviation hub when it comes to the supply chain and distribution of vaccinations around the world. Now, obviously, these, excellent infrastructure did not just, appear overnight. It had already been cultivated, and therefore it supports my thesis that in the era of pandemics, countries that have made an investment in, in policy and also in attractive tools such as infrastructure will be poised, all right, to take advantage of COVID diplomacy as a form of soft power influence. Bilateral aid. This is straightforward. UAE basically has given and come to the aid of several countries in terms of vaccines, to the extent that it has even extended help to Western countries such as the UK and the United States. Regionally, it has provided millions in vaccination vaccine aid to countries in the region and also in Africa and also in Asia. And UAE has dispatched over 196 medical flights and set up, several field vaccination camps in the Middle East and in Africa. And this is going, or has gone a long way to also increase the soft power influence of the UAE in the form of COVID diplomacy. Related to this is multilateral aid. And multilateral aid, this is where basically the UAE basically has proven to be much more effective. All right, in terms of the global consortium global consortium that is basically leading the fight to make vaccines available, the UAE has funded 80% of the budget of the global consortium. When it comes to making vaccines accessible to needy countries. This is remarkable in terms of the US contributions. It is not the richest country, but in this case, all right, it is leading the effort by putting down 80% of the funds. And clearly, all right, because of the global impact of these funds, all right, it will inure to the UAE's soft power influence in the near future and generate goodwill for the UAE in the near future in the form of soft power influence.
I just want to point out, you have about 3 to 5 minutes left, so that we'll have time for Scott and discussion.
Absolutely, I'm right on track. Yes, yes, right on track. Just a couple of pages left. Also, another form of contribution is private-public partnership. Organizations around the world, NGOs around the world, like the Gates Foundation, Oxfam, and the rest, have partnered with the UAE. They've received funding from the UAE government to make vaccines available to needy countries. Also, companies in the UAE have also come up with vaccination tools, such as syringes and also vaccination kits. All right, and this is also contributing to UAE COVID diplomacy, and obviously also soft power influence around the world. Lastly, since its founding, the UAE has prided itself as a country that is generous, as a country that believes in financial aid to those that are needy. It has invested in international philanthropy. It has institutionalized international philanthropy, international aid as a cornerstone of its foreign policy. And therefore, it is not surprising that in the midst of pandemics, it was primed to play a major role in the new form of soft power dubbed COVID diplomacy. The UAE case, all right, offers a blueprint for a new phase of soft power in the form of humanitarian assistance in the midst of pandemics. And if you look at the UAE's case, it shows that countries that have institutionalized international philanthropy, countries that have a long track record of soft power tools will be primed to play a major role when it comes to humanitarian assistance, and also burnish their soft power credentials during crises such as global pandemics. Thank you. Just as a disclaimer, just last week, I received good news. The paper that I submitted concurrently or simultaneously for this conference to a journal, is out. It has been published by the Journal of International Women's Studies. So at the time I was writing the paper, I submitted it out simultaneously, and I just got the good news that it's been published by the Journal of International Women's Studies, just as a disclaimer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation. So Scott is going to share his thoughts, and then we can all discuss.
Yes, you all hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Our panel has, through natural selection, evolved into a panel of soft power, which it wasn't originally, and that's just fine. Both papers I found were very interesting. I appreciated Osman's discussion of the things that allowed the UAE to become a contributor in this way, the physical infrastructure, what you might call the diplomatic infrastructure in the terms of embassies and relationships and so on, resilient economy. And in particular, the comment in the paper that you really have to get your own internal affairs in order first in order to establish a relationship across. Oh, that made me wonder. There are different ways and different concepts of getting your internal affairs in order, and some of them could be negative in terms of creating a reputation for some countries that try to do it repressively. And David's comment on Obama's Kenyan heritage creating an opportunity for him to connect with people in Africa got to me wondering how resilient something like that is. Does that get lost after Obama leaves the scene? Does Trump wipe out the Obama effect, or was he able to institutionalize something in these policies that he set out that can create a basis for later presidents who do not have that relationship, that heritage connection, that they'll still be able to build on? And that in reading both papers, I found myself asking questions more about the concept of soft power and the notion of policies designed to promote soft power, which I was kind of want to throw out. Now, maybe people more familiar with the literature on this would have easy answers for these, but I kept kind of pestering in the back of my head. Is it possible to measure the impact of soft power policies, or are we left to say that the stated objectives, which are almost universally acclaimed, promoting vaccinations, allowing people to be vaccinated who might not have been otherwise, promoting education opportunities like that, it's difficult to make an honest faith argument against those things. Do we just say they're positive things, so they must have had a positive effect, or is there a way to actually measure what that effect was in the long run? And how do you define the effect? In the education programs, for instance, is success to be seen in these people becoming leaders in their own society later on? Or is it to be seen in a general improvement of reputation in those countries? If those people become leaders in their own countries later on, but don't pursue policies favorable to the United States, is that a failure of the earlier policy, or is that something that you really can't abide by? And what if people who are brought to for an educational opportunity end up having a bad experience? I mean, just statistically, somebody's going to have a bad experience. And does that counteract the overall effect, or does it depend on the percentage of people who have positive experiences? And the COVID policies, if the COVID policies do nothing but keep people from getting sick and dying, you can't call them a failure. But if they do that and they don't change the image of the United Arab Emirates, it's still a successful policy, but does that undermine the success to the extent that that was the purpose in the first place? I mean, it's not the sole purpose, because I think you want to keep people from dying from COVID. But how do you measure, can you measure the reputational effect of something like that? Is it possible to distinguish the effects of what I was thinking of as natural sources of soft power from manipulated sources of soft power? Now, manipulated sounds negative, and I don't mean it to be negative, but by manipulated, I mean these policies that are specifically designed to have that effect versus other things that a country does or that happens in a country that affects other people's image of it, whether it's, I don't know, Hollywood movies creating an image of the United States, or Russian ballet or something like that, versus policies that you specifically undertook in order to create an image. How do you tell how much of your reputation is influenced by either of those? Is it even possible? And how do policies that are designed to promote soft power interact with policies that are designed with entirely different purposes in mind? I mean, you've got the United Arab Emirates, which is putting huge amounts of money into these very positive things, but it's also involved in the war in Yemen and in Libya. or the United States, which is bringing people over to offer educational opportunities, but is involved in Iraq or in Libya. And how does that sort out? You might, maybe you and your family are alive because of COVID, but you've got relatives in Yemen or something like that. Is it possible to balance that? And perhaps it makes it even more important to have the positive policies to counteract effects like that. And of course, some people like the fact that you're, promoting a particular side in Yemen or in Iraq. But as a measurement question, can that be examined and explained in some way? And I guess that's the upshot of what I had on those two.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I don't know who wants to respond first. David or Osman, do you want me to choose, or does one of you want to just go ahead?
I can respond.
Okay.
And thank you for those questions. And again, I think all valid points, because again, sometimes in terms of politics, it's based on recipient angle, right? It's how from one's viewpoint. So even in terms of issues of soft power, it's based on how do you see it, how do you experience it, to be able to interpret from your perspective. So I think the measurement or measuring question is important, because it's a difficult one, right? Because I think it's only from the administration point of view that they're able to say, this is what we did from their perspective. But you could, counter argue in terms of, but it did not meet certain threshold. Having said that, and I think this came up because even when I was researching more of the soft power, there was also this argument of, wait a minute, look at the Obama's hard power and the wars in Libya, like has been said, and in places like Uganda with Joseph Kony, right? But again, I think having said that, one of the relevance that brings this, I think it was based on the previous experience of the previous administration, if I may argue that way. Because I think then in places like in Kenya, the argument is the connection, because he's not only a son of a Kenyan father, but also there's extended family within the country. So again, the lineage is there, but I also think what this is sort of connected to is the fact that America has been involved with Africa for a very long time. And I think in my paper, I talk about the Kennedy experience, right? Where he touches on Africa and the need for us to go beyond colonialism for, the countries to be ready for, for their, decide their own destiny. And so because of that historical impact, I would argue actually Obama tried to leverage that. And so Obama talks about, I'm doing, for example, this program as a way to pay it forward. I'm paying it forward for the generation that brought my father here, meaning some of this is sort of connected to the Kennedy administration, right? The people who helped my generation come here. And so I'm trying to do my bit as a Kenyan American, as an African American, as an American president, in making sure that we are connected and we move on one direction. Again, I think, in terms of the policy, I think, like I said, the Presidential Policy Directive sort of tries to explain the argument and how they saw Africa. And I think, I remember a speech given by Johnny Carson, former the Under Secretary of State, I think, for African Affairs at Harvard, and sort of emphasized on those very notions. And so I think it was well choreographed when they did all these trips in the African continent, even Hillary Clinton going to Africa. Sort of the sentiments were the same. These are sort of the things that we do hope that will help our relationship move to the next level. And so, how do you maintain that? I think all in all, the approach sort of worked, because on one hand, I do believe and argue that United States need Africa, and because of the challenges of China, right? So that relationship will be there, albeit changes, but there is something I think we'll continue to see because, like I argued, China is not going away, and with that, United States also will try to position itself both, from the soft power approach, but also I think from the, economic interest as well. So I think for me, despite the fact that we might have challenges in terms of how you measure this, I think at the end of the day is the way it's sort of presented by the administration, as well as the the nations on the other side, who talk about that experience, or even the those that have benefited out of the quote unquote the soft power approach.
Thank you, David. Osman, do you want to respond? And I don't know if you want to keep sharing your screen.
Okay, let me see.
Whatever you want, but maybe when you're done, you can stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Scott raised some very, very pertinent questions that has plagued the research on soft power. And of particular note is how to measure the effectiveness of soft power. It continues to be a major challenge and critique of soft power. However, in the case of the UAE, there are some anecdotal evidence to show that indeed UAE's efforts or UAE's continuous cultivation of soft power is, has been paying some dividends. One of the tools that the government often cites as a vindication of this continuous soft power cultivation is the global, what they call the Global Passport Index ranking. The Global Passport Index ranking is a ranking that basically talks about how many countries that a country citizens are able to visit without a visa, basically. And this shows you that, countries that are, affording certain country citizens the right to freely travel, okay, they are responding to the image of that country as a positive and worthy country of cultivating. And, it might interest you to know that for the past 3 years, the UAE has ranked top 3. And actually last year, its passport was deemed the most powerful in the world, whereby its citizens are able to travel to 153 countries without visa. And the government cites this as a record, says, look, all right, many countries like to keep people out, people from this region out of their countries. But for some reason, it's not that, it's not a coincidence that they don't seem to have enough of us. And continue, many countries are inviting and lowering the bar and inducing us to come because they trust our policies. They know our citizens are well behaved. They know, respect our values. They feel like, we are mainstream, all right? Unlike our neighbors, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and others. So they cite these, passport rankings as a vindication of their policy. That's, hey, wait a minute. Okay, this is a testament that, we are highly respected and highly regarded in the world based on the policies, soft power policies that we have cultivated around the world. The next index that they cite is the influx, the continuous rise and influx of tourists into the country. Okay, the Middle East has this very negative reputation, okay, as the most dangerous region in the world. All right, terrorism, sectarianism, and all these kind of stuff. And they said, hey, wait a minute, okay, why is it that, everybody wants to come here and party, all right, but not, party in neighboring countries? So they say, hey, the fact that our country continues to be among the top 10 tourist destinations around the world is a testament that indeed people, respect us. People are responding positively to our policies. They feel like, you know what, it is a place where they'll be safe, they'll feel safe, they'll feel welcome. They feel like our policies are mainstream. And hence they cite, increasing tourist numbers as a tool, as an effective measurement that their policies are working. Second, they also cite, increasing immigration to the country. So much so that the UAE is a country where 90% of the residents are actually, foreigners. And this actually shows you that, they have actually, in terms of per capita, the UAE has the most diverse immigrant pool in the world. So much so that during the COVID, during the test for COVID, during the test for the efficacy of most of the COVID vaccines, the UAE actually was chosen as a place for COVID vaccination trials because they have a very, very diverse population. You have 200 nationalities, much more diverse than the United States. So they were able to, do a more scientific testing of the efficacy of the vaccine because, all right, you will find far more diverse population in the UAE than anywhere in the world. So they'll say, well, the fact that, we have attracted so many people around the world to come and live here to the point where we are a minority shows you that, people are responding to our policies. They feel welcome, they feel safe. They believe in our policies, they believe in our image, they believe in whatever we are doing. So they say, hey, you know what? Our diverse residency pool and immigrant pool is also a good measurement of the efficacy of our soft power approaches. Then also, in terms of foreign policy, you realize that the UAE continues to break the mold, okay, when it comes to setting taboo foreign policy, so much so that just a couple of years ago, it established diplomatic relations with Israel, something that is that was groundbreaking in this part of the world, all right, in the form of the Abraham Accord, okay? They always say that, look, all right, this represents a new frontier in our foreign policy, all right? If we are deemed to be illegitimate in our actions around the world, we would not be able to broker and open new frontiers of diplomacy. That's, hitherto were considered taboo. Also, they point to increasing foreign direct investment. Money all over the world likes to go to safe places. And they will say that, look, you know what? The same soft power attraction that has made Switzerland, all right, the jewel of Europe, or the soft power attraction of Europe and many of these Scandinavian countries, soft power havens, we are following the same playbook. And in that regard, they will say, look, all right, we can be measured with some of these countries in that regard. So those side foreign direct investment flows as a measurement of their soft power attraction. So these are just some few measurements, as I pointed out, it requires, thorough scientific studies and measurements to be able to confirm this, but anecdotally, it offers promising leads in terms of the effectiveness. And of course, as you pointed out, when countries and their citizens benefits from some kind of COVID relief, clearly, all right, they will know, it's very, very likely that they will be very appreciative of their benefactors. However, there are challenges, and you make the point with the Yemen case, okay? How do you balance this, image of international philanthropy with negative foreign policy outcomes such as the Yemen war, for example, okay? That, you can, we always say that good news, bad news, travels worldwide and, get transfixed in people's imaginations longer than the good news, okay? Not many people even know that the UAE is a world leader in international philanthropy. But when they see the images of Yemen refugees, as a consequences of UAE's intervention in that conflict. Clearly, all right, that could, harden negative images about the UAE, particularly in the Western media and also in a country like Yemen. So that has always been a challenge, even for the United States, as much as the United States has been a global leader in soft power. Okay, its hard power activities tend to cloud its image around the world, and the UAE must be cognizant of such hard power interventions in Libya and also in Yemen. Then the last question was on the issue of manipulated effect, and that is very relevant. One of the main attractions, according to Joseph Nye, of soft power is culture, of a country's culture. Okay, clearly the UAE doesn't have that dominant culture, to be that effective, right? It doesn't have the advantage of Hollywood. It doesn't have the advantage of sports supremacy or Olympic triumphalism and that kind of stuff. All right, it doesn't have these iconic cultural icons, all right, in the world of sports or in music or in film as the United States has. So then I think, they rely on what Scott has pointed out as manipulated effect. Now, Scott, not everybody is born naturally gifted and, with the looks like some of us, but nevertheless, others get by with enhanced appearances, and it still has the desired effect of, them being considered attractive and having the same impact and appearing in the same centerfolds and, captivating the imaginations of others. So in that sense, all right, the UAE, all right, has also come up with its own quote unquote manipulated effect, all right, in terms of attraction. And, you see this in investments like infrastructure that is, paying dividends, attracting tourists, all right, positioning itself, as a logistical hub in times of pandemics, also having these aviation, advantage in the form of Emirates Airlines that has become almost indispensable in times of, transportation. So clearly, this is the consequences of UAE's soft power tools and strategies.
Thank you very much. I think we only have 5 minutes left. Is that correct? It's an hour-and-a-half session. Yes. So there are a few questions from one of the audience members. They're in the chat. So I don't know if either of you want to respond to one of those. Clearly, we can't address them all.
Let me see here. Okay.
I can read them, but I assume you can all see the chat.
All right. Okay. A question that is says, could we compare UAE, USA, Chinese, and Russian approaches in Africa? I think both. You cannot compare them. All right. UAE's approach is not systematic. All right, UAE's approach in Africa is not as systematic and strategic as Chinese and US soft power approaches in Africa. Okay, UAE's approach in Africa is mostly, humanitarian assistance. All right, it hasn't gotten to the point where, offering like educational scholarships and stuff like that. All right, and also the cultural influence, it's not on the scale of that of the US and China. However, there's growing interest in the UAE in trying to cultivate soft power influence in Africa because of Africa's diplomatic advantages when it comes to the United Nations.
Thank you. David?
Yes, let me respond to this question about how Obama built on from the policies of George W. Bush. And one of the ideas, or one of the things that I did come across in my research, was this idea of incrementalism. So Barack Obama talks about on creating a new re-engagement with Africa. He does not, really shun the previous administration's policies. In actually, what he does, for example, if you recall, the PAPFA, the policy on that helped in sort of funding, especially in the area of humanitarian and AIDS, Obama builds on it. And so that was a continuing in terms of the policy, and sort of helped make that policy work. Another one, for example, was in issues of issues happening in terms of democracy. For example, if you recall, the sanctions that were put on Zimbabwe during the I think Bush and Blair times, because of the issues happening in Zimbabwe, when Obama comes into power, he actually continues in terms of enforcing those policies and actually support some of the people in Zimbabwe that were sort of standing up against Robert Mugabe. And even in, I think, one of the occasions in, I think, 2013, he honors two of the human rights activists in Zimbabwe for the work they were doing in terms of trying to bring up human rights issues. So again, in looking at these cases, he builds on the Bush policies, but present them in his own perspective in terms of, this is how I see Africa, and this is where we go from here.
Thank you very much. I believe we are at the last minute. So is that correct, Harvey? This just goes to 2:45? Yes. So I'm going to stop recording. I don't know if this meeting will just automatically close, but it was a great discussion. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to the presenters, very interesting papers. Thank you to Scott. And yes, I'm going to stop recording, but if you want to continue talking.
And